Hello, and I'm here. I finished uni. I'm gonna start making videos again. Now, I can already hear the collective cacophony of sighs and cheers simultaneously. I've missed you all. I have been very much wanting to make videos this entire time, but you know, I had I had the work to do. I have to admit, my brain was very much working at in a weird place. And as a result, the reading that you'll see I've done, whilst I've done a lot of reading, I will say it's been an odd experience in terms of trying to balance having fun, still getting stuff out of reading, being able to even focus on stuff sometimes because your brain's thinking about absolute nonsense. If you are glad to see me back, I would appreciate if you did leave a like. Don't feel like you have to, but it would be appreciated. Considering this is my first video back, same way that I've kind of dipped in and done like best ofs, I thought that it would be best to just come in here, let you know what I have thoroughly enjoyed so far this season. Like it's a fucking TV show. This year so far. So allow me to kick into it. Also, please allow me to get used to this kind of public speaking. I have not done YouTube videos for a while, so it may take me a little bit to get into the mood. We are starting with one of the best fantasy series I've ever read, which is the Age of Madness trilogy by Abercrombie. This is Abercrombie perfected. You know, everything that he has been growing and also already begun brilliantly at has just grown so brilliantly. Every aspect of this trilogy, A Little Hatred, The Trouble with Peace, and The Wisdom of Crowds, three of my favourite fantasy titles of all time, it all just culminates so brilliantly. And it's one of the best reading experiences I have ever had. I am going to be taking part in a conversation about the Age of Madness trilogy with Grace, Murphy, and Bryce at the end of this month, I think, which is like a week and a bit away now. But we'll go into it a lot more there for people who have read the series. Otherwise, this is book like 8th to 10th in this series. So if you haven't read any, I'm not going to go into spoilers in terms of who's there, etc. The main thing that I really want to reiterate is that I took a long break between book one and book two. It took me a while to start. It also, after the third book, going to that first standalone took a while. After Best Served Cold, I took a break. I took a break after Red Country. No matter where you are, this series, I think it naturally has that feeling where you need a bit of a break. But my main urge would be, no matter where you are, start or continue. Because when you reach this end, it's just it's just stellar. There is not a wasted page, there is not a wasted sentence, there's certainly not a wasted joke. Just everything about it was exemplary. And upon finishing, I do have to say that the First Law is now firmly tied with Realm of the Elderlings as my favourite fantasy series of all time, which I did not think going into this final trilogy. I was like, this is up there, but I still think Realm of the Elderlings is a step beyond. But this final trilogy did a hell of a lot to completely bolster it up to the same level. So we got off to a hell of a start. Now, this is in no particular order. That is important to specify. I'm not ranking them or anything. This is just the kind of time span that I read them from beginning to end of the year. So next up is not the actual book because I don't own it. However, it's part of the Winter Night trilogy. This is the third book, The Winter of the Witch. Mine is the second book, The Girl in the Tower by Catherine Arden. The reason I don't have the series here is because I read this when I was visiting Grace in January, so this is a classic Grace bullying paying off series. I can't really complain if she's kind of prodding me and goading me to read it if the series ends up on my best of the year list. The ends justify the means. So this series is set in medieval Russia and it essentially follows Vasia, who is this young girl, and it tells the story of the struggles between the foundations of the church and folklore of the land. The first book, Bearing the Nightingale, is much more of a family drama. And then the second book, it completely opens up and expands, really goes into that central conflict of church and folklore. And that was completely mesmerizing. it's a very different feeling in the sense of dealing with something that's very fantastical, but it's so deeply rooted in history. When you read fantasy, there's quite a bit of abstraction with religion, you know. There are clearly allusions to real world religions. However, there is an abstraction of thought. However, in this, it's deeply rooted in Christianity. Um, and it adds a different layer, a different dimension to the reading experience that you don't always get. And the other thing is that Arden's writing is so wonderful in capturing the atmosphere of the time and also the weather. You know, reading this in Canada when it was snowing and everything, it's the perfect mood to pick this up and experience this snowstorms and hail and all of this horrific but cozy weather. And I think there's a real great balance of tone that, you know, I know like Grace, for instance, says that this is a very cozy fantasy in the sense of, I think that comes more from the atmosphere of weather rather than the actual, and the writing style of like a fable rather than the actual story itself. The story is quite dark. And I think that, you know, it's got that grim aspect, that feeling of darkness and coziness being kind of drawn together. So I would save this for a winter read. It's a great trilogy, also very short, can just really rifle through it. I read it in a month, I think, all 3 books. This one I don't have with me. I've been in the process of selling books, ready in preparation for moving to Grace's. So if you want to buy some books if you're in the UK, such as the first 7 books of The Wheel of Time or all of The Realm of the Eldlings or whatever, then there will be a link in the description to my Vinted, which, you know, if you fancy it, have a gander. If you don't, it doesn't really matter. But this year I caught up with the Gentleman Bastard series. This one I really have to thank Murphy for, because I read the first book however long ago, and I enjoyed it. I did have issues with it, but I did enjoy the overall experience. But I didn't really have a call to go back to it. And then I received an email from Murphy saying, "Would you like to talk about the series?" And I thought it was like 2 years since I read it at that point. So I thought it would be a disservice if I didn't reread at least the first book. And I completely adored it on the second time round. There's just something unlocked for me. I think maybe it was because it was early in the year at uni and I needed that escapism, something brilliant, humorous. It just did all the things. Same as Abercrombie, where it provided escapism through humor and like world building, rather than in like this is a happy thing, because neither of them are particularly happy. So this is another one. It has astronomically flown up my best fantasy list. Despite it being unfinished, whatever, doesn't bother me at the moment because I just have completely adored every single entry that I've read in this series. So I read The Republic of Thieves this year, and I know this is kind of seen as the weakest in the series. I disagree. I actually really loved the third book, but I think that's because it seems tailor-made for me, which is we get a lot of expansion in the magic and also the kind of central crew that we've known, and then the kind of the central plot follows the experience of them in a theatre group, in a theatre company. And I have always, ever since second year at university, when I studied kind of like Shakespeare and his contemporaries and everything, that has now been something that I cannot stop thinking about, is that era, that mood, the characters involved, etc. And to see that played out in a fantasy world, kind of set at that time, set in essentially an Italian city-state inspired world, which is what English theatre was writing about that era at the time. It just completely worked for me. So I know that's an extremely niche interest to kind of focus on, but that is what it was for me. It provided a heightened experience because it was such a mood, and I've wanted to create that myself and to read it and experience it and be like, oh, that really can work. So that's a lot of fantasy. As you can see, I've been reading a lot of fantasy and finishing a lot of fantasy. You know, that's the First Law Winter Night trilogy, and I caught up on Gentleman Bastards all this year. that's pretty damn impressive to me. But to escape from the escapism, as it were, despite this having a lot of fantastical elements, next up is Crooked Plough. This was on the Booker International Prize shortlist. It did not win. Kairos won, which happened yesterday, to let you know when I'm filming this. And funnily enough, the week before that one, I went into a charity shop and found it in hardback for 50 pence. So everything's coming up Millhouse from my perspective. This follows two young girls in the hinterlands of Brazil. They, at the beginning of the book, are playing around. They find their grandmother's luggage, a kind of suitcase filled with things, and inside of it is a knife wrapped in kind of dirty rags and stuff. And they take it out, and one of them puts it in their mouth, gets kind of knocked, slices their tongue. Then the other one puts it in their mouth, gets knocked, and slices their tongue off. And the book essentially follows the connectiveness and the division between them over the years that follow, and that provides a kind of parallel for the society at large. You know, that it comments on the kind of political aspects of moving beyond slavery in the region, but still having people working the land, etc. It has a lot to do with politics of colonialism and slavery, moving beyond that in the immediate aftermath, and the wounds that are impossible to heal following that kind of horror. And you know, like I enjoyed like Human Acts by Hank Kang. I've enjoyed Midnight Children, etc. There is an element of tying historical fact to magical realism that creates such it's like an invitation into that time, and it conveys certain things thematically that is hard to balance without that. And so 100% recommend this. I did find that the ending lost me a little. I think that's honestly just because of the work I was doing at the time, but the first 2/3 completely had me enraptured. So I was actually disappointed this didn't win. I think this would be a perfect Booker International winner. But, you know, I haven't read Kairos yet, so it could be that I completely love that one and think it should win. Next up is Stillborn by Guadalupe Nettel. This kind of has three central characters. They span from someone who does not want kids, someone who is struggling to have kids, someone who has a child and is struggling to raise them. And it ties all of these three women's lives together in a way that was incredibly emotional, but at the same time effortless to read because of the writing style. I'm not quite sure how to describe it, but I felt a real effortlessness just flying through this book. And at the same time, I was completely moved by every scene, because there are two central... The relationship with the mother and her child was incredibly difficult to read. And then also the relationship between one of the characters trying to have a child and struggling to conceive was extremely difficult. And that central plot was so difficult to read and was so beautifully told that is reason enough to read it for me. And to not give really anything away, I think there's an expectation you have when you go in. You hear the title Stillborn, you know what it's about, and you kind of have this preconceived notion of how dark it's going to be. And I think that the author played with that to a degree which gave me a book I was not expecting. And I would 100% recommend this book. It's one of my favourites of the year. Malazan is back. It's book 6 and it's a banger. Bone Hunters has one of my favourite scenes in all of Malazan. It has the same level of brilliant humour, incredible world building, brilliance, like nothing short of brilliance. This is the series that makes me most feel like I am in a completely different reality. You know, I read certain fantasy that I love. You know, Abercrombie's so deeply rooted in like English history, mythology, and politics. Malazan has those exact same key points that you can kind of tie to the real world, but it is conveyed in such a way that it just makes me feel like I am in a completely different reality with completely different species and races, and therefore the exploration that can be done around that is it becomes deeply philosophical and profound. And as a result, it doesn't need to play by the rules of how people converse or anything, because this is a completely different reality with completely different aging conventions, racial relationships, gender relationships. Nothing is the same in this world quite to how we have it here. And I think that that allows conversations to be had that you can't necessarily have in other fantasies. And I think the one of the best examples I can think of to convey this is that you've got characters who have human lifespans, you know, and their stories have a sense of urgency to them because the same way that we do, there is a sense of needing to do something before you're fucking dead. However, in Malazan, you've also got characters who have been alive for hundreds, thousands of years, and their plot kind of advances at a speed that is so much slower than the human characters, and I think that provides just a sense of realism to the scale of the series, because you know when you've got a character who's thousands of years old, they don't need to move at the speed that we're used to. That they can take essentially books traveling, and they will be quite happy just dotting in and out, and then suddenly they're involved in the plot. But the series integrates these characters so well, and because it's done such a brilliant job of setting up the fact that this is not our world, completely different species existing at different times, and yeah, I think that that's one of the most brilliant things that when I think back on it, I'm like, man, they really did nothing, but it's because they're thousands of years old and they're just going at their own pace. It's just in relation to characters who have a percentage, like a tiny percentage of the lifespan, that it feels like they're moving slow. For them, they're just getting on. So Malazan is such a goated series. I cannot wait to continue. Reaper's Gale is in Canada, which means I cannot continue it until I'm there. But when I get there, I will be continuing. Then we've got two new releases. So one is Knife by Salman Rushdie, Meditations After an Attempted Murder. This was brilliant in the sense of my main thing that I'll say about this is that if you are interested in Rushdie or what happened to him, then you will get a lot from this. If you aren't interested in Rushdie or have not read his stuff, then you probably won't. And that is just the simple fact. You know if you're interested in this or if you're not. And if you are interested, it's exactly what you would expect, which is brilliant. So I don't really have much more to say than that. I think it kind of speaks for itself. And lastly, but certainly not least, is now certified one of my favourite authors, especially favourite author living today, which is Ronan Hession with Ghost Mountain. This came out, I think technically it comes out tomorrow, but it was being sold in like independent bookstores and stuff earlier this month. So I bought it, and I love Ronan Hession's work so much. This is essentially the plot follows where a mountain has appeared in this place. A mountain has appeared in a field that is currently having an argument over whether someone should be able to walk their dog in it, or whether the landowner wants them on it or not. That's the kind of petty shit we're dealing with when a mountain just appears out of thin air. Could have just appeared, who knows? And it then follows the lives of those who interact or exist around this mountain. Essentially, this is a big diversion from Hession's usual work. Hession's usual work, for me, talks about people in disparate or poignant places in their life and how they find connectiveness between people that allows them to progress and become better people. There is a sense of recovery for me in a lot of Hession's work, especially Panenka, but it is always about that connectiveness. And this, however, is very much about the absences inside of people, the the created stories that we have around the people about us, the people we love, the people we hate, and how that grows and festers and kind of rots us on the inside. And this focuses on that rather than the connectiveness, the kind of synapses between people. This kind of focuses on the rot and the tumours that exist. How a kind of a hereditary rot can set into a family almost. It's needless to say his darkest novel, in my opinion. The other ones had that sense of hope to uplift it. This is very much rooted in in the darkness. And you can kind of tell that from there are kind of these passages throughout which talk about this kind of the Ghost Mountain was Ghost Mountain. It's not anything more. It's not anything less. It is there, and that kind of also sets a precedent for the idea of that nature is there. It's ever present, and the world is ever present, and these stories revolve and they reoccur, and it's very much like a sense of history as a circle, and how like minor deviations occur, but the same motifs are happening over and over again. But that at the same time, despite those having those reoccurrences, something like Ghost Mountain, it is unknowable. It's always there for everyone to see. However, it is completely unknowable, and I think that gets down to the root message of like how these mistakes can continue to happen. Um, uh, Overall, it was so good. It had the same dark humor that Hession's other work does. This book had me very early on going from crying to laughing in the space of a page. Um, and that comes down to that Hessian, more than any other author, I feel, can really like pull out my life, like reach into me, pull out my family, my friends, the people I've seen, people I've worked with, and just completely lay them on the page with a level of empathy and thoughtfulness, especially for characters who are working class, etc. He does it with such a thoughtfulness and a profound sense of understanding that I don't think I see many authors being able to consistently now just nail each time. So Hessian, no matter which one you pick up one of his books. I beg of thee. He is a fantastic author, one of the best, in my opinion, working today, and I will read whatever and whenever he publishes something new. So, that's it. We've completed it. That's me back. That's a series of books that I have loved this year, which is a pretty good showing. If you did enjoy, please again like and subscribe, etc. Otherwise, I'm back. There's really not much more to say than that. I've missed you all. I'm very much looking forward to making more content. And I hope you have a lovely rest of your day.